When the HOA letter arrived demanding I pay fines for my supposedly abandoned property, I laughed. When I discovered my own sister had been telling the entire neighborhood I was in a nursing home with dementia, I stopped laughing. My lawyer said we should fight them in court immediately. I said no. Let them think they've won. At the final HOA meeting, I arrived with documents that made the board president's face drain of color as she read the first page. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The citation was taped to my front door when I returned from my morning walk. Bright orange paper, official looking, with the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association seal stamped across the top in navy blue ink. I peeled it off carefully, my reading glasses sliding down my nose as I tried to make sense of the words in the early September sunlight. Notice of violation. Property Code 47B. Abandoned residence. Fine assessed at $500, increasing by $250 per week until violation is remedied. Hearing scheduled for September 28 at 7 o'clock in the evening. I stood on my own front porch, keys dangling from my hand, staring at a piece of paper that claimed my house was abandoned. The house I'd lived in for 18 years. The house where I'd raised my daughter after my divorce. The house I'd walked out of 30 minutes earlier to get my daily exercise around the neighborhood lake. My name is Dorothy Sinclair, and at 61 years old, I'd thought I'd seen every variety of human foolishness. I'd worked as a high school mathematics teacher for 33 years before retiring, which meant I'd navigated teenage drama, administrative incompetence, and budget cuts that would make an accountant weep. I'd survived a contentious divorce from a man who decided his midlife crisis required a 24-year-old personal trainer named Amber. I'd put my daughter through college while managing on a teacher's salary and pride. But this was something new entirely. I unlocked my door and stepped into the cool interior of my home. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. My coffee cup sitting on the kitchen counter still half full. The newspaper spread across the breakfast table, folded to the crossword puzzle I'd been working on. My gardening gloves on the bench by the back door, waiting for me to finish weeding the rose garden this afternoon. Nothing about this house suggested abandonment. Nothing about it suggested anything other than a woman who'd stepped out for her daily constitutional and planned to return shortly, which was exactly what had happened. I picked up my phone and dialed my daughter, Claire, who lived 40 minutes away in the city. She was 32 now, working as a pharmaceutical sales representative, married to a decent man named Thomas who worked in financial consulting. We spoke every few days, and she visited at least twice a month for Sunday dinner. The call went to voicemail. Claire, it's your mother. Something very strange has happened. Call me when you get a chance, nothing urgent but definitely odd. I hung up and dialed my sister, Patricia, who lived just 6 blocks away in the same neighborhood. Patricia was 3 years younger than me at 58, though she'd spent enough money on cosmetic procedures that she could sometimes pass for early 50s in forgiving light. She'd married well twice, first to a dentist and then to a commercial real estate developer, and had the kind of lifestyle that included country club memberships and annual trips to European spas. Patricia answered on the second ring. Dorothy, I wasn't expecting to hear from you today. There was something odd in her voice, a careful quality that I couldn't quite identify. Well, I said, I've had a very odd morning. The HOA has apparently decided my house is abandoned and fined me $500. Silence on the other end. Then oh my, that does sound like a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, I repeated. Pat, I literally walked out of my house this morning, walked around the lake, and came home to find this citation on my door. How does someone mistake an occupied house for an abandoned one? I couldn't say, Patricia said, and there was definitely something wrong with her tone now. Have you been keeping up with the yard work? Sometimes the HOA gets particular about appearances. My yard is immaculate, I said, feeling my temper start to rise. You know how I am about the garden. I spent 3 hours last weekend trimming the hedges and edging the flower beds. Well, perhaps you should just go to the hearing and explain the situation. I'm sure it will all get sorted out. We talked for a few more minutes, but Patricia seemed distracted, eager to end the call. When I hung up, I had the distinct impression that my sister knew more about this situation than she was saying. I made myself a fresh cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table to read the citation more carefully. The language was formal, full of whereas and hereby and in accordance with, but the basic message was clear. The HOA board had determined that my property showed signs of abandonment, including but not limited to accumulated mail, lack of visible occupancy, failure to maintain regular residence patterns, and absence of vehicle movement. Accumulated mail was absurd. I checked my mailbox every single day. Lack of visible occupancy was equally ridiculous. I was visibly occupying my house right now. Failure to maintain regular residence patterns, what did that even mean? An absence of vehicle movement, well, that one was actually somewhat accurate. My car had been in the shop for the past 2 weeks getting the transmission repaired, but I'd arranged for a loaner vehicle which I'd been driving regularly. I pulled out my laptop and opened my email, searching for the name of the HOA board president. It took me a moment to remember because the board had new leadership as of 6 months ago. The previous president, a retired engineer named Walter Hughes, had moved to Arizona to be near his grandchildren. The new president was someone I'd met only once or twice at neighborhood events. Her name was Vivian Rothschild, and she lived in one of the larger houses on the north side of the development, a sprawling contemporary with a 3-car garage and professionally maintained landscaping. I'd spoken to her briefly at the spring block party. She was perhaps 55, impeccably dressed, with the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no about anything that mattered. I composed a careful email explaining that there had obviously been some mistake, that I was very much in residence and had been for 18 years, and that I would appreciate if the citation could be withdrawn and the fine cancelled. I attached a photo of myself standing in my living room with that day's newspaper visible in the frame, just to make the point absolutely clear. The reply came back within an hour. Mrs. Sinclair, thank you for your email. However, the citation stands as issued. Multiple neighbors have reported concerns about your property over the past several weeks. The hearing on September 28th will provide an opportunity for you to present your case to the full board. Please plan to attend with any documentation you feel is relevant. Regards, Vivian Rothschild, HOA Board President. Multiple neighbors had reported concerns about my property over the past several weeks. I set down my coffee cup very carefully, because my hands had started to shake with something that felt like anger but was edged with genuine confusion. What neighbors? What concerns? I'd lived on Sycamore Lane for nearly 2 decades. I knew everyone on my street. The Jeffersons next door were a retired couple who brought me vegetables from their garden every summer. The Chens across the street had teenage twins who mowed my lawn when I was busy with end-of-year grading, back before I retired. The Patels 3 houses down always waved when I walked past on my morning routes. Who among them would report my house as abandoned when they could clearly see me coming and going every single day? I decided to do some investigating of my own. I changed into presentable clothes, dark slacks and a crisp white blouse, and walked down to the Jeffersons' house. Margaret Jefferson answered the door with her usual warm smile, though it faltered slightly when she saw my expression. Dorothy, is everything all right? I held up the orange citation. Did you happen to notice anyone from the HOA coming by my house recently? Or hear any concerns about my property? Margaret's smile disappeared entirely. She glanced back into her house, then stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door mostly closed behind her. Dorothy, I don't know how to say this exactly. Just say it plainly, Margaret. We've been neighbors for long enough. She took a deep breath. There's been talk about you. Your sister Patricia has been telling people that you're not well, that you've been having memory problems, and that the family is making arrangements for you to move into assisted living. The world tilted slightly. I gripped the porch railing to steady myself. Patricia said what? She's been quite concerned apparently. She told several of us that you've been found wandering the neighborhood confused, that you've been forgetting to eat, that you sometimes don't recognize where you are. She said the family was trying to handle it quietly out of respect for your dignity. I felt heat rising up my neck and into my face. Margaret, I am standing here having a perfectly lucid conversation with you. Do I seem confused? Do I seem like someone who doesn't know where she is? Of course not, Margaret said quickly. But Patricia seems so sincere. And she is your sister. We thought maybe you were having good days and bad days. That maybe we were only seeing you on the good days. I see, I said, though I didn't see at all. How many people has Patricia talked to? Margaret looked uncomfortable. Most of the street, I think. She's been quite active in spreading the word, making sure everyone knows to keep an eye out for you. To call her if they notice anything concerning. And has anyone noticed anything concerning? Well, no, Margaret admitted. You seem exactly the same as always. But Patricia was so insistent that there were problems and she showed us some paperwork, something about medical evaluations. We assumed she must know something we didn't. Paperwork. Medical evaluations. Patricia had been showing my neighbors forged medical documents about my supposed cognitive decline. Thank you for being honest with me, Margaret. I appreciate it more than you know. I walked back to my house in a daze, my mind racing through implications and possibilities. Patricia had been systematically telling the neighborhood that I was incompetent. She'd been laying groundwork for something, creating a narrative where I couldn't be trusted to manage my own affairs or even recognize my own home. But why? I sat down at my computer and started searching. Property records, estate documents, anything that might give me a clue about what my sister was planning. It took me most of the afternoon, but eventually I found something that made my blood run cold. 3 months ago, Patricia had filed paperwork with the county clerk's office, attempting to establish a guardianship over me. The petition claimed I was suffering from early-stage dementia and could no longer safely live independently. It requested that Patricia be granted legal authority over my financial and medical decisions. The petition had been denied due to lack of medical evidence, but it had been filed. My own sister had tried to have me declared incompetent without my knowledge. I kept digging. In the guardianship petition, Patricia had listed my property address and included an estimated value of $750,000. Meadowbrook Estates had appreciated significantly since I'd bought my house 18 years ago for $200,000. My little 3-bedroom ranch on a quiet street was now worth $750,000. And Patricia, I was beginning to understand, wanted it. But there was more. I found an email thread that Patricia had apparently accidentally copied me on 6 months ago. Something I deleted without reading because it seemed like HOA administrative nonsense. Now I pulled it up from my trash folder and read it carefully. It was a conversation between Patricia and Vivian Rothschild about properties that might become available for redevelopment in the neighborhood. Patricia had specifically mentioned my address as a potential opportunity, noting that the current owner was aging and might be persuaded to sell soon for the right offer. Vivian had responded with interest, mentioning that her son-in-law ran a property development company that specialized in buying older homes in desirable neighborhoods, demolishing them, and building luxury spec homes that sold for $2 to $3 million. My house wasn't just valuable to Patricia as an asset she might inherit someday. It was valuable right now to her and to her new friend Vivian Rothschild, as a property they could acquire cheaply under the guise of helping a confused elderly woman, then flip for an enormous profit. The abandoned property citation wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was step one in a plan to force me out of my home. I sat in my kitchen as the afternoon light faded, trying to process the scope of what my sister had done. She'd attempted to have me declared incompetent. She'd spread rumors about my mental decline throughout the neighborhood. She'd conspired with the HOA president to create a paper trail suggesting my house was abandoned. Also, she could eventually force me into selling my property to developers who would split the profits with her. My phone rang. It was Claire finally returning my call. "Mom, sorry I missed you earlier. What's going on?" I took a deep breath. "Claire, I need to ask you something and I need you to be completely honest with me. Has Aunt Patricia said anything to you about my health? About memory problems or confusion?" There was a long pause. "Mom, she called me about a month ago. She said she was worried about you. That you'd been acting strangely, forgetting conversations, seeming disoriented. She wanted to know if I'd noticed anything." "And what did you tell her?" "I told her you seem fine to me, that we talk regularly and you've never seemed confused or forgetful." "Why? What's happening?" I explained about the citation, about the conversations with Margaret, about the guardianship petition I'd found. As I talked, I could hear Claire's breathing getting faster, could sense her anger building. "She tried to have you declared incompetent?" Claire's voice was shaking. "Mom, that's elder abuse. That's fraud. We need to call the police. We need to get a lawyer." "I know," I said, "but I need to think about this carefully. If we move too quickly, Patricia might destroy evidence or convince Vivian to back off. I need to understand the full scope of what they're planning before we take action." "What are you going to do?" I looked down at the orange citation on my table, at the hearing date circled in red. I'm going to let them think they're winning. I'm going to play the confused old woman they've been telling everyone I am. And I'm going to gather evidence of everything they've done. Mom, Claire said slowly. You sound like you're planning something. I replied. I'm planning to protect myself and my property. And I'm planning to make sure Patricia and Vivian Rothschild understand that they picked the wrong person to manipulate. After I hung up with Claire, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, thinking through my options. I'd spent 33 years teaching high school mathematics, which meant I understood the importance of carefully working through problems step by step. You didn't jump to the solution. You showed your work. You proved your conclusions. I needed to prove what Patricia and Vivian were doing. I needed documentation, witnesses, evidence that would hold up not just in HOA proceedings, but potentially in court. I pulled out a notebook and started making lists. What I knew, what I suspected, what I needed to find out, who might be willing to help me, what resources I had at my disposal. The hearing was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks to build my case and prepare my response. 3 weeks to figure out exactly how Patricia had pulled this off and what she'd planned as her next move. But there was something else I needed to do first. I needed to find out who else was involved in this scheme, because I didn't believe Patricia had orchestrated this alone. She'd never been particularly clever or organized. Someone was helping her, advising her, maybe even directing her. I opened my laptop again and started searching for connections between Patricia and Vivian Rothschild. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. 5 months ago, Patricia had joined the Meadowbrook Estates Social Committee, the same committee that Vivian chaired. They'd been working together on neighborhood events, committee meetings, planning sessions. That was where the conspiracy had started. Vivian, always looking for development opportunities, had seen my property as potential gold mine. Patricia, always eager to ingratiate herself with wealthy, influential people, had volunteered me as a mark. Together, they created a plan to acquire my house through manipulation and legal maneuvering, rather than honest negotiation. I found photos from social committee events posted on the neighborhood Facebook page. Patricia and Vivian at the spring block party, heads close together in conversation. Patricia and Vivian at the summer concert series, laughing at some shared joke. Patricia and Vivian at the August ice cream social, just 6 weeks ago, standing in front of a banner advertising committee accomplishments. In that last photo, if I zoomed in carefully, I could see they were looking at something on Vivian's phone. Their expressions were focused, calculating. I wondered if they were looking at property listings or development plans, or perhaps the guardianship petition that Patricia would file just weeks later. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Patricia. Dorothy, I heard about the HOA citation. So sorry you're going through this. Why don't you come over for dinner tomorrow night? We can talk about everything. The audacity was breathtaking. She wanted to have dinner, to sit across from me and pretend to be concerned while she plotted to steal my house. I typed back a response. That sounds lovely. What time? 6 o'clock, Patricia replied. Just family, very casual. We have so much to catch up on. I stared at that message for a long time. Just family. As if family meant something to Patricia beyond opportunity and exploitation. As if I was supposed to trust her because we shared DNA and childhood memories and parents who'd been dead for over a decade. But I texted back a cheerful acceptance and started planning what I would wear to dinner with the woman who was trying to destroy my life. That night I barely slept. I lay in my bed in the house I'd lived in for 18 years, listening to the familiar sounds of the neighborhood settling in for the evening. The distant bark of the Patel's dog. The hum of air conditioners running against the warm September evening. The occasional car passing on the main road 3 blocks away. This was my home. I'd chosen the paint colors on these walls. I'd planted every bush and flower in the garden. I'd replaced the roof and updated the kitchen and refinished the hardwood floors. I'd celebrated birthdays here and mourned losses here, and built a life here after my marriage fell apart. Patricia wanted to take all of that away from me. Not because she needed the money, she was comfortably wealthy from her own marriages. Not because I was actually incompetent or in danger, but because she saw an opportunity for profit and decided my well-being was less important than her bank account. The next morning, I drove to the county courthouse and filed a request for copies of all documents related to Patricia's guardianship petition. The clerk, a efficient woman named Rosa who recognized me from my years of teaching her son, recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Sinclair," she said warmly. "How are you? Diego talks about your algebra class all the time. Says you were the best teacher he ever had." "I'm well, Rosa, thank you. Though I'm dealing with some family legal matters that have me a bit concerned." Her expression shifted to professional sympathy. I pulled up the guardianship file. This was denied pretty quickly. The judge noted there was no medical evidence supporting the claims of incompetence. Were there any other documents filed? Any follow-up attempts? Rosa clicked through screens on her computer. "Not for guardianship, no. But let me check something else." She typed rapidly, her brow furrowing. "Huh, that's interesting. What is?" "There's a power of attorney document filed 2 months ago. It grants Patricia Sinclair Chen authority over financial and medical decisions for Dorothy Elizabeth Sinclair." I felt my heart stop. That's me. But I never signed a power of attorney. Rosa looked up at me, her expression troubled. "Mrs. Sinclair, this document has your signature notarized and everything. Are you saying you didn't sign it?" "I never signed anything. I didn't even know it existed until right now." Rosa printed out a copy and handed it to me. The signature on the bottom of the page looked like mine, close enough to pass casual inspection. But I knew my own handwriting, knew the particular way I formed my capital letters, the slight leftward slant of my script. This was a forgery, a skilled one, but definitely not genuine. "I need to report this," I said. "This is fraud. You should contact the district attorney's office." Rosa wrote down a name and number on a sticky note. "Ask for Detective Marcus Webb in the fraud division. He's good, thorough. He'll take this seriously." I left the courthouse with the forged power of attorney document in my purse, and a growing sense of just how far Patricia had been willing to go. She hadn't just spread rumors or filed false petitions. She'd forged legal documents, created paperwork that gave her control over my entire life. With that power of attorney in place, Patricia could access my bank accounts, sell my property, make medical decisions on my behalf. She could have me institutionalized against my will if she claimed I was a danger to myself. She could dismantle my entire existence and I would have no legal standing to stop her. Except she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd done all of this while I was still perfectly competent, still able to recognize what was happening and fight back. If she'd waited until I actually developed dementia or serious health problems, her plan might have worked. But she'd gotten greedy, moved too fast, and now I had evidence of her fraud. I called Detective Webb from my car in the courthouse parking lot. He agreed to meet with me that afternoon at 3 o'clock. I spent the intervening hours going through every financial document I could find, checking my bank statements and credit reports for any signs that Patricia had already started using the forged power of attorney. Everything seemed normal so far, but I knew that could change at any moment. I called my bank and placed a fraud alert on all my accounts. I contacted my investment advisor and notified him that any requests supposedly from me should be verified through a phone call, using our agreed-upon security questions. I changed all my online passwords and set up two-factor authentication on everything from my email to my utility accounts. By the time I met with Detective Webb, I had a folder full of documentation. The forged power of attorney, the denied guardianship petition, screenshots of the emails between Patricia and Vivian about redevelopment opportunities, the HOA citation, a written statement from Margaret Jefferson about Patricia's campaign to convince neighbors I was mentally incompetent. Detective Webb was perhaps 45, with graying hair and the patient, methodical manner of someone who'd seen too much human cruelty to be shocked by anything. He listened to my entire story without interrupting, taking detailed notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and studied me carefully. "Mrs. Sinclair, I have to tell you, this is one of the more elaborate elder fraud schemes I've encountered. Your sister has been very thorough in creating a paper trail that supports her narrative. But it's all false," I said. "I'm not incompetent. I never signed that power of attorney. She's manufacturing evidence to steal my property. I believe you, and will investigate thoroughly. But I need you to understand that this kind of case can take time to build. We'll need to verify the signature forgery, interview witnesses, subpoena records. It could be months before we have enough evidence to bring charges." "Months," I repeated. "Detective Webb, the HOA hearing is in 3 weeks. If Patricia and her friend on the board successfully paint me as an incompetent abandoned property owner, they could force a sale before your investigation is complete. Then you need to win that hearing, he said simply. Document everything. Record conversations if Virginia law allows it, which it does with single-party consent. Gather witnesses who can testify to your competence. And whatever you do, don't let them know you're on to them. If Patricia realizes you've figured out her scheme, she might accelerate her plans or destroy evidence. I left the police station feeling both validated and terrified. I was right about what Patricia was doing, but I was also racing against multiple clocks. The HOA hearing. The criminal investigation. Whatever Patricia's next move might be. That evening, I dressed carefully for dinner at Patricia's house. Conservative slacks and a cardigan, minimal makeup, my gray hair pulled back in a simple bun. I wanted to look like the confused elderly woman Patricia had been describing to the neighborhood. I wanted her to think her plan was working. Patricia's house was everything mine wasn't. Where I had comfortable simplicity, she had calculated luxury. The foyer alone was larger than my living room, with marble floors that probably cost more than my annual retirement income, and a crystal chandelier that caught the evening light and scattered it into 1,000 prismatic fragments across the walls. My brother-in-law Richard greeted me at the door with the kind of embrace that suggested warmth while delivering none. He was Patricia's second husband, a man who'd made his fortune buying strip malls and office parks, and then leasing them to businesses desperate enough to pay his premium rates. At 63, he'd maintained the physique of someone who paid a personal trainer handsomely, and the tan of someone who spent more time on golf courses than in offices. "Dorothy, so good to see you," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone people use when they're speaking to someone they believe is mentally diminished. "Patricia's in the kitchen putting the finishing touches on dinner. Can I get you something to drink? Wine? Sparkling water?" "Water would be lovely," I said, deliberately fumbling with my purse strap and letting my keys drop to the marble floor. Richard rushed to pick them up, exchanging a quick glance with Patricia, who'd emerged from the kitchen wrapped in an apron that probably cost more than my entire outfit. "Dorothy," Patricia exclaimed, coming over to kiss my cheek. "I'm so glad you could make it. Come sit down in the living room. Dinner will be ready in just a few minutes." The living room was a showcase of wealth and taste, or at least what interior designers convinced wealthy people was taste. Everything matched too perfectly. The throw pillows coordinating with the drapes coordinating with the area rug in shades of cream and gold and subtle taupe. There wasn't a single personal item visible. No family photos or collected treasures or books that had actually been read. It looked like a hotel lobby designed to impress rather than a home meant to be lived in. Patricia settled into the armchair across from me, while Richard disappeared to get my water. Her expression was arranged into concern, but I could see the calculation behind her eyes. She was assessing me, looking for signs of the incompetence she'd been advertising to the neighborhood. "So," she said, leaning forward with exaggerated sympathy, "tell me what happened with this HOA business." I was so surprised when I heard. I let my hand shake slightly as I reached for the tissue box on the side table, a nice touch that I'd practiced earlier. "It's all very confusing, Patricia. They're saying my house is abandoned, but I don't understand how that's possible. I'm living there." "Of course you are," Patricia said soothingly. "Though Dorothy, and please don't take this the wrong way, but have you been spending much time there lately? Sometimes when we're getting older, we don't realize how much time we're spending away from home." I frowned, playing confused. Away from home? Where would I be going? "Well," Patricia glanced toward the kitchen where Richard had disappeared. "You know, just out and about. Running errands, visiting friends. Sometimes the days can blur together and we lose track of time." I let that sit for a moment, watching her watch me. She was probing, trying to see if I actually was as confused as she'd been telling people. "I think I would remember if I was away from my house for extended periods," I said slowly. "Though I suppose you're right that the days do seem to go by quickly at my age." Patricia's expression brightened slightly, encouraged by what she interpreted as agreement. "Exactly. And Dorothy, I've been meaning to talk to you about something. Richard and I have been thinking that maybe it's time we looked at some alternative living arrangements for you. Nothing drastic, just exploring options that might be easier to manage than a whole house." Alternative living arrangements. She wasn't even bothering to be subtle about it. "What kind of alternatives?" "Well, there are some lovely senior communities in the area. Places where you wouldn't have to worry about maintenance or yard work or dealing with HOA issues. Places with activities and social opportunities, meal plans, medical staff on site. You'd have your own apartment but with support when you need it. Richard returned with my water in a crystal glass, setting it down on a coaster before settling onto the sofa beside Patricia. We've actually taken the liberty of researching a few options, he said. There's a place called Heritage Gardens that we think would be perfect for you. They have availability in their assisted living wing. Assisted living, I repeated, letting my voice quaver just slightly. But I don't need assistance. I'm managing fine on my own. Patricia reached over and patted my hand. Of course you are, dear. But wouldn't it be nice not to have to manage? To have someone else handle all those daily responsibilities? You've worked hard your whole life. You deserve to relax and let others take care of things. What would happen to my house? Richard and Patricia exchanged a look, quick and loaded with meaning. Well, Patricia said carefully, we would help you sell it, of course. The market is very strong right now. You could get an excellent price and use that money to pay for your care at Heritage Gardens. You'd be set for years. I see, I said quietly. And who would handle the sale? We would, naturally, Richard said. As family, we want to make sure you get fair value and that the process goes smoothly. Patricia already has power of attorney, so she can manage all the legal details. You wouldn't have to worry about any of it. So they thought the forged power of attorney was legitimate and enforceable. They thought they already had control over my finances and property. I took a sip of water to buy time, trying to keep my expression confused rather than furious. I don't remember signing a power of attorney, I said. Oh, you did, Patricia assured me quickly. A few months ago when you were having that spell. Don't you remember? We met with a notary and took care of all the paperwork. A spell. She was building the narrative even now, creating a false memory of incompetence that she could reference later. What kind of spell? You were feeling very disoriented that day, Patricia said. You called me quite upset because you couldn't remember how to work your coffee maker. I came over and found you very confused, so we decided it was a good time to put some legal protections in place. Just in case. I stared at her, marveling at the smoothness of the lie. She'd thought through every detail, created a complete backstory for events that had never happened. I don't remember that at all. That's exactly why we needed to do it, dear. The memory problems have been getting worse. We're all very worried about you. Richard cleared his throat. Dorothy, there's something else we need to discuss. The HOA hearing in 3 weeks. Patricia and I have been talking to some people, and we're concerned that if you attend the hearing in your current state, you might say things that could make the situation worse. My current state, I repeated. You might get confused or emotional, Richard explained. These hearings can be very stressful. Lots of questions and legal procedures. We think it would be better if you let Patricia represent you. She can explain about your health situation and negotiate a settlement with the board. A settlement where they force me to sell my house to their developer friend Vivian's son-in-law. No doubt. That's very thoughtful of you both, but I think I should attend. It is my house after all. Patricia's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, if you feel up to it. But Dorothy, you should know that the board president, Vivian Rothschild, is a good friend of mine. She's very concerned about the situation. If you antagonize her or seem unstable at the hearing, it could make everything much more difficult. There it was, the implicit threat. Play along with their narrative of my incompetence or face consequences from Patricia's ally, who controlled the HOA board. I let my shoulders slump as if discouraged. I suppose you know best. You've always been better at handling these sorts of official matters. The relief on both their faces was almost comical. That's very wise, Dorothy, Richard said. We'll take care of everything. You don't need to worry about a thing. Dinner was served in their formal dining room at a table that could have seated 12 but held only the 3 of us. Patricia had made salmon, roasted vegetables, and some kind of grain salad that she assured me was very healthy for seniors. Throughout the meal, she and Richard maintained a steady stream of conversation about people I didn't know and events I hadn't attended, occasionally pausing to explain something to me, as if I were a child who needed help following adult conversation. I played my role perfectly. I asked questions that seemed slightly off topic. I lost track of a story Patricia was telling about her book club. I picked up my fork with my left hand even though I was right-handed, then switched halfway through as if just noticing the awkwardness. Every small action was calculated to reinforce the image of mild cognitive decline. After dinner, Richard excused himself to take a phone call, leaving Patricia and me alone with coffee in the living room. This was what I'd been waiting for. A chance to probe more deeply into her plans without Richard's watchful presence. "Patricia," I said, setting down my coffee cup with an exaggerated care that suggested I was afraid I might spill it. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, anything. Why are you really doing this?" Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "Doing what, dear?" "All of this. The concern about my house, the talk about assisted living, the power of attorney I don't remember signing. I may be getting older, but I'm not completely oblivious. You want something." For a long moment, Patricia just looked at me, and I could see her recalculating, trying to decide how much I actually understood. Then she smiled, and it was perhaps the first genuine smile I'd seen from her all evening. It was cold. "Dorothy," she said slowly, "you've lived in that house for 18 years. You bought it after the divorce when property was cheap, and you scraped together a down payment on a teacher's salary. Do you have any idea what it's worth now?" $750,000, I said. "Give or take. Try $825,000. I had it appraised last month. The market has been exceptional, and your location is prime. That's a corner lot on a quiet street in one of the best neighborhoods in the county. And you want to sell it." Patricia leaned back in her chair, her posture relaxing now that we were apparently being honest with each other. "There's a developer who's very interested. He builds luxury homes, modern designs that sell for $2 to $3 million. He's offered me a finder's fee of 10% of the sale price if I can deliver the property. That's over $80,000, Dorothy, for making one introduction. So you decided to have me declared incompetent so you could force the sale." She shrugged. "You're living alone in a house that's too big for you. Dealing with an HOA that's going to make your life miserable until you leave anyway. I thought I was actually helping you transition to a more appropriate living situation while also benefiting financially from a deal that was going to happen eventually anyway. Except it's my house, Patricia. My decision. Not yours. You're 61 years old and living on a teacher's pension. How much longer can you really afford to maintain that property? The property taxes alone are over $8,000 a year now. The roof will need replacing in a few years. The HVAC system is original to the house. You're looking at tens of thousands in maintenance costs." "I can afford it," I said. "Can you?" Patricia leaned forward. "Because from what I've seen of your finances, you're barely breaking even each month. One major expense and you'll be forced to sell anyway, probably in a panic sale that nets you far less than what we could get in a planned transaction. You've been looking at my finances. I have power of attorney, Dorothy. I have access to everything. And I'm telling you as your sister who loves you, this is the smart move. Sell the house, move into Heritage Gardens where you'll be comfortable and cared for, and stop struggling to maintain a lifestyle you can't really afford anymore." I stared at her, this woman who'd shared a childhood with me, who'd been my maid of honor at my wedding, whose daughter had spent summers at my house when she was young. She'd accessed my bank accounts using a forged legal document, and was now justifying it as concern for my well-being. "And if I refuse?" I asked quietly. Patricia's expression hardened. "Then the HOA will continue to fine you. $500 this month, $750 next month, $1,000 the month after that. They'll put liens on your property for unpaid fines. Eventually they'll force a sale to recover their costs. And when that happens, you won't get nearly the value we could get now in a private transaction. Vivian Rothschild is helping you with this. Vivian understands business. She understands that sometimes properties need to change hands to reach their full potential. The neighborhood will benefit from having a beautiful new home on that corner lot instead of an aging ranch that needs work." "I see," I said. "And how much is Vivian getting out of this deal?" Patricia smiled. "That's between Vivian and the developer. But I can tell you that everyone benefits. You get enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life. I get my finder's fee. Vivian facilitates a valuable development. The developer builds something spectacular. The neighborhood improves. It's what business people call a win-win-win situation. Except I never agreed to any of it." She stood up, clearly deciding the conversation was over. "You will, Dorothy. Once you understand that you don't really have a choice. Now Richard and I have some papers we'd like you to sign tonight." Just some preliminary documents about the assisted living placement and the property sale timeline. I'm not signing anything tonight, I said, standing as well. Patricia's expression cooled. Don't be difficult about this. We're trying to help you. I need to think about everything you've said. And I'd like to have my own lawyer review any documents before I sign them. You don't need a lawyer. You have family. I need to go home now, I said, gathering my purse. Thank you for dinner. Richard appeared in the doorway as if on cue. His phone call apparently concluded at exactly the right moment. Everything all right in here? Dorothy's tired, Patricia said. She's going to head home. Richard drove me home even though I had my loaner car, and was perfectly capable of driving myself. He kept up a steady stream of pleasant conversation about nothing in particular, and when we pulled into my driveway, he turned to me with practiced concern. Dorothy, I hope you'll think seriously about what Patricia said tonight. We really do have your best interests at heart. I'm sure you believe that, I said, and got out of the car before he could respond. Inside my house, I immediately went to my home office and began documenting everything from the evening. Every word Patricia had said. Every implication and threat. The admission that she'd accessed my finances using the forged power of attorney. The revelation about the finder's fee and Vivian's involvement. I was shaking with anger as I typed, my fingers hitting the keys harder than necessary. My own sister. My only living family besides Claire. She'd looked me in the eye and explained exactly how she was planning to steal my home and my independence, and she genuinely seemed to believe she was doing me a favor. My phone rang at 9:30. It was Claire. Mom, how did dinner go? Did you find out anything useful? I told her everything, watching through my window as lights came on in houses up and down the street. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that their neighbor was fighting a battle against family betrayal and institutional corruption. Claire's voice was tight with fury when I finished. She actually admitted all of that to you? Just laid out the whole scheme? I think she believes I'm either too confused to understand what she's really saying or too weak to fight back. She sees me as an obstacle to be managed, not a person whose rights matter. What are you going to do? I'm going to build my case, I said. I have 3 weeks until the hearing. 3 weeks to gather evidence, line up witnesses, and prove to the HOA board that I'm not incompetent and my property isn't abandoned. And then I'm going to make sure Patricia and Vivian face consequences for what they've tried to do. Do you need me to come stay with you? I can take time off work. Not yet, but I might need you at the hearing. Having you there, visibly competent and supportive, will help counter the narrative Patricia's been spreading. After we hung up, I sat in Floyd's No in my office and looked around at the life I'd built here. The bookshelf full of math textbooks and mystery novels. The desk where I'd graded thousands of homework assignments and tests. The window that looked out onto the garden I'd planted and tended. The walls I'd painted a soft sage green because I liked how the color changed in different light. This was mine. I'd earned it, paid for it, made it into a home. And I wasn't going to let Patricia take it away because she saw an opportunity for profit. The next morning, I began implementing the plan I'd been forming. First stop was my bank, where I met with the manager who'd helped me refinance my mortgage 3 years ago. His name was Stephen Chan, no relation to my neighbors across the street, and he'd always treated me with professional respect. Mr. Chan, I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. I have a situation I need your help with. I explained about the forged power of attorney, carefully not mentioning names yet. His expression grew increasingly concerned as I talked. Mrs. Sinclair, this is very serious. If someone is using fraudulent documents to access your accounts, we need to take immediate action. Can you check to see if there have been any attempts to access my accounts using power of attorney credentials? He typed rapidly on his computer, his frown deepening. Yes, actually. 3 weeks ago, someone came in with power of attorney documents and requested complete account information. We provided it per our standard protocols. I'm so sorry I didn't personally handle that transaction, or I might have questioned it. Can you tell me who came in? He checked his records. A Patricia Chun. She presented what appeared to be valid power of attorney documents and proper identification. The staff member who helped her had no reason to suspect anything irregular. I need that power of attorney revoked immediately, I said. And I need a fraud investigation opened. I have evidence that the documents were forged. Stephen Chan nodded grimly. I'll start the paperwork right now. And Mrs. Sinclair, I'd recommend you consider pressing criminal charges. This is bank fraud in addition to the forgery. Detective Webb is already investigating, I assured him. But any cooperation your bank can provide would be helpful. My next stop was my doctor's office. I'd been seeing Dr. Raymond Patel for 15 years, ever since I moved to the neighborhood. He was one of my neighbor's sons, the one who'd gone to medical school and opened a family practice nearby. When I called and explained I needed an urgent appointment regarding a legal matter, his receptionist squeezed me in that afternoon. Dr. Patel listened to my story with increasing outrage. Mrs. Sinclair, Dorothy, this is unconscionable. You're one of the healthiest 61-year-olds in my practice. Your last cognitive screening was completely normal. There is absolutely no medical basis for claims of dementia or incompetence. I need that in writing, I said. An official statement that I can present at the HOA hearing and provide to the detective investigating the fraud. He was already pulling up forms on his computer. I'll prepare a comprehensive evaluation documenting your cognitive status, physical health, and capacity for independent living. And Dorothy, if you need me to testify anywhere, in court or at this hearing, I'll make myself available. What your sister has done is not just illegal. It's a betrayal of trust that I find deeply disturbing. Over the next week, I methodically built my case. I obtained copies of all the forged documents from the county clerk's office and had them analyzed by a handwriting expert who confirmed they were not in my hand. I gathered bank statements showing no unusual expenditures or behaviors that might suggest cognitive decline. I collected written statements from neighbors attesting to my competence and regular presence in my home. I met again with Detective Webb, who informed me that his investigation had uncovered additional troubling information. Patricia had been making regular payments to a notary public named Linda Marshall, who had apparently been willing to notarize documents without actually witnessing signatures. Linda Marshall was now cooperating with authorities in exchange for reduced charges, and she'd confirmed that Patricia had brought her pre-signed power of attorney documents and paid her $500 to backdate the notarization. The case against Patricia was becoming ironclad. But the HOA hearing was a separate matter, one where criminal charges wouldn't necessarily help me. I needed to prove to the board that the abandoned property citation was baseless, and that the entire complaint was part of a conspiracy to force me out. That's when I decided to do something that felt slightly underhanded but necessary. I started recording my conversations with Patricia. Virginia is a one-party consent state, which meant I could legally record any conversation I was part of without informing the other parties. So when Patricia called to check in on me, expressing fake concern about how I was handling everything, I had my phone set to record. When she stopped by unannounced to discuss the Heritage Gardens assisted living facility, I had a recording device in my pocket. Every interaction became documentation. The recordings were damning. Patricia discussing the property's sale as if it were a foregone conclusion. Patricia mentioning her finder's fee multiple times. Patricia explaining how she and Vivian had coordinated the HOA citation to create urgency. Patricia even laughing about how easy it had been to convince neighbors I was incompetent. Another pause, longer this time. I don't see how that's relevant to the HOA's concerns. It seems very relevant to me, Mrs. Rothschild. It suggests that the citations weren't really about abandoned property at all, but rather about creating pressure to force a sale that would benefit you personally. Her voice cooled noticeably. Mrs. Sinclair, I don't appreciate your implication. The HOA board takes its responsibilities seriously. We have documented concerns from multiple residents about your property. Residents like my sister, who's been telling lies about my mental competence while forging legal documents to steal my house. The silence on the other end was absolute. Then, very carefully, I think we should continue this conversation at the formal hearing with all parties present. I agree, I said. See you in 1 week, Mrs. Rothschild. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, but this time it was adrenaline rather than anger. I just tipped my hand, let Vivian know that I was aware of the conspiracy and prepared to fight it. It was a calculated risk, but I wanted her off balance going into the hearing. I wanted her worried about what evidence I might present. That evening, Claire came to visit. She brought Thai food and a bottle of wine, And we sat in my kitchen like we had so many times over the years, talking about everything and nothing. Mom, she said eventually, are you scared? Terrified, I admitted, but more angry than scared. What Patricia has done, what she's tried to do, it's so far beyond normal sibling rivalry or even garden variety greed. She was willing to destroy my reputation, steal my home, and institutionalize me against my will. For money she doesn't even need. Claire reached across the table and took my hand. You know I'll be there at the hearing. And Thomas said he'd come too if you want additional family support. I squeezed her hand gratefully. I need you there. Patricia has been painting a picture of a lonely, confused old woman with no support system. Having you there proves that's false. I have a daughter who loves me and stays involved in my life. I'm not some abandoned elder they can manipulate without consequence. What do you think will happen at the hearing? Honestly, I think it depends on how many board members are in on the scheme with Vivian. If it's just her, then presenting evidence of the conspiracy should be enough. If others are involved, or if they're just willing to look the other way because they trust her leadership, then I might still lose despite having the facts on my side. And if you lose, then we fight it in court. And we make sure Patricia faces criminal charges for everything she's done. But Claire, I really don't want to lose my house. Not because I'm particularly attached to the building itself, though I do love it, but because letting them win this way would set a precedent. It would tell every HOA board and every greedy family member that they can get away with this kind of manipulation if they're just persistent enough. The week before the hearing crawled by. I prepared my presentation obsessively, organizing documents into logical sections, creating a timeline of events, practicing what I would say. I met with an attorney specializing in HOA disputes, who reviewed my evidence and agreed to attend the hearing as my counsel. His name was Marcus Liu, and he'd handled hundreds of HOA cases over his 20-year career. After reviewing everything I'd gathered, he leaned back in his chair and shook his head with something like admiration. Mrs. Sinclair, in all my years of practice, I've never seen someone build a case this thoroughly without legal training. You've documented everything, obtained expert opinions, gathered witness statements, even recorded conversations. This is better evidence than most lawyers would compile. I taught mathematics for 33 years, Mr. Liu. I know how to show my work and prove my conclusions. He smiled. Then let's go prove them to the HOA board. But I should warn you, even with overwhelming evidence on our side, board politics can be unpredictable. Be prepared for them to try to table the decision, call for additional review, anything to avoid making a ruling that might expose them to liability. What should I do if they try that? Push back. Politely but firmly insist on a resolution. You've complied with their process, attended their hearing, presented your evidence. They need to make a decision, not punt it down the road indefinitely. The night before the hearing I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed watching shadows move across my ceiling, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Patricia's betrayal, Vivian's corruption, the forged documents and manufactured evidence and systematic campaign to paint me as incompetent. But the most valuable piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Margaret Jefferson from next door knocked on my door one afternoon carrying a covered dish and a worried expression. Dorothy, she said, I made you some lasagna. I thought you might need comfort food right now. I invited her in, touched by the gesture. As we sat in my kitchen, she kept glancing around as if checking to make sure we were alone. There's something I need to tell you, she said finally. Something I should have told you sooner, but I wasn't sure if it was my place. Go ahead, Margaret. I appreciate your honesty. 3 months ago, Patricia came to our house for book club. We host it once a month, just a few neighbors. Patricia brought wine and seemed very friendly, more social than she usually is. At one point, she pulled me aside and asked if I'd noticed anything odd about you. What did she ask specifically? Margaret shifted uncomfortably. She asked if you ever seemed confused or disoriented. If you ever forgot our conversations or repeated yourself. If you ever appeared to be wandering without a clear purpose. I told her no, that you seemed perfectly fine to me. But then she said something strange. What? She said that sometimes people hide their problems, especially people who are proud and independent. She said you'd been diagnosed with early dementia but were in denial about it. She showed me what she said was a doctor's report confirming the diagnosis. I felt my anger rising but kept my voice calm. Did you keep the report? Or remember any details about it? Margaret nodded and pulled out her phone. I took a photo of it because something felt off. I teach high school science, Dorothy. I know how to recognize official medical documents. This one looked almost right, but there were small things that seemed wrong. The formatting wasn't quite standard. The doctor's name didn't match any physicians I could find in our area. She showed me the photo. It was a forgery, and not even a particularly good one. The letterhead was for a neurologist named Dr. Marcus Weinstein, who supposedly practiced in Sacramento. But the address was wrong, the phone number led to a disconnected line, and the medical terminology was just slightly off, the kind of mistake someone would make if they were researching dementia online rather than actually treating it. Margaret, would you be willing to testify about this at the HOA hearing? And provide a copy of this photo as evidence? Absolutely. Robert and I have been feeling terrible about the whole situation. We believed Patricia because she's your sister, but we should have trusted our own observations. You've been a wonderful neighbor for 18 years. We should have questioned why someone would suddenly claim you developed problems when we saw no evidence of it ourselves. After Margaret left, I sat at my kitchen table and looked at the photo on my phone. Patricia had manufactured medical evidence. She'd created a false diagnosis from a fictional doctor and used it to convince neighbors I was incompetent. The audacity and premeditation of it took my breath away. But it also gave me exactly what I needed. With this forged medical document, I could prove to the HOA board that Patricia had been running a coordinated campaign of defamation. It wasn't just spreading rumors, it was creating false evidence to support those rumors. I called Detective Webb and told him about Margaret's evidence. He asked me to have Margaret come to the station to make a formal statement and provide the original photo file with metadata showing when and where it had been taken. The next day, I received a call from Vivian Rothschild. Her tone was carefully neutral, the voice of someone trying to sound reasonable while delivering an ultimatum. Mrs. Sinclair, I wanted to reach out personally regarding the upcoming hearing. I understand this has been a difficult time for you. Thank you for calling, Mrs. Rothschild, I said, keeping my own voice equally neutral. I've been speaking with your sister Patricia, and we both agree that perhaps there's a way to resolve this situation without the stress of a formal hearing. If you were willing to work with us on a voluntary sale of your property, the HOA would be willing to withdraw the citations and waive all associated fines. There it was. The offer that confirmed everything I'd suspected about her involvement. How generous, I said. But I'm curious why the HOA would withdraw legitimate citations just because I'm selling my house. There was a brief pause. Well, the citations are based on concerns about property maintenance and occupancy. If the property is going to be sold and redeveloped, those concerns become moot. I see. And would this buyer happen to be your son-in-law, the developer? But I also thought about the people who'd helped me. Dr. Patel providing medical documentation without hesitation. Margaret Jefferson coming forward with evidence despite her initial belief in Patricia's lies. Stephen Chun at the bank taking my fraud claim seriously. Detective Webb treating my case with the gravity it deserved. Claire standing beside me without question. I'd spent so much of my life focused on the betrayal, on what Patricia had tried to take from me. But there was another story here too. One about a community that ultimately chose to believe truth over convenient narratives. One about institutions that, when presented with evidence of wrongdoing, took action rather than looking away. That thought sustained me as I finally drifted off to sleep just before dawn. Whatever happened at the hearing tomorrow, I'd done everything I could to prepare. The rest would depend on whether justice still meant something in Meadowbrook Estates, or whether power and profit had won out over principle. The community center meeting room was packed when I arrived 15 minutes early. I'd expected the standard handful of board members and perhaps a few curious neighbors, but there must have been 40 people crowded into a space designed for 20. Word had apparently spread that this wasn't going to be an ordinary citation hearing. Marcus Liu met me at the door, his briefcase heavy with organized evidence. He dressed in a sharp navy suit that projected authority without aggression, and he'd advised me to do the same. I wore a tailored charcoal dress with pearl earrings, my hair styled professionally, my posture straight and confident. I wanted to look like exactly what I was, a competent woman in full possession of her faculties. Claire and Thomas were already seated in the front row, having arrived early to secure good positions. Claire gave me a subtle thumbs up as I walked past. Behind them I could see familiar faces from the neighborhood. The Jeffersons. The Chins. Dr. Patel had come as well, carrying what I assumed was his medical documentation. Even Stephen Chan from the bank had shown up, apparently prepared to testify if needed. Patricia sat on the opposite side of the room with Richard, her expression carefully arranged into concerned sympathy. She dressed conservatively as well, projecting the image of a devoted sister worried about a troubled sibling. She caught my eye and gave me a small wave, as if we were still on the same team. Vivian Rothschild sat at the head table with 4 other board members I recognized by sight but didn't know well. She wore an expensive cream-colored suit and diamond earrings that caught the fluorescent light. As people settled into seats and the murmur of conversation filled the room, she shuffled papers with theatrical importance, the picture of administrative competence. At exactly 7 o'clock, Vivian called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending tonight's special hearing regarding property citation number 47B against Mrs. Dorothy Sinclair of 23 Sycamore Lane. Mrs. Sinclair, you've been cited for maintaining an abandoned property in violation of Meadowbrook Estates community standards. Do you have representation tonight? I do, I said clearly. Marcus Liu stood beside me. This is my attorney, Mr. Marcus Liu. Very well. Mrs. Sinclair, you'll have an opportunity to respond to the citation after the board presents its evidence. Does the board wish to present first? We do, Vivian said. Over the past 6 weeks, this board has received multiple reports from concerned residents regarding Mrs. Sinclair's property. These reports indicate prolonged absence from the residence, accumulation of mail and newspapers, lack of property maintenance, and general signs of abandonment. Marcus Liu's pen was already moving across his legal pad, noting each claim for rebuttal. I kept my expression neutral, though my heart was racing. One board member, a man named Douglas Wright, who I vaguely remembered as someone's retired accountant husband, raised his hand. Mrs. Rothschild, could you specify which residents filed these reports? And do we have them in writing? Vivian hesitated for just a fraction of a second. The reports were made verbally to me as board president. I documented them in the board's complaint log, which is standard procedure. But you don't have signed statements from the complainants? Marcus Liu asked mildly. That's not required under our bylaws, Vivian replied sharply. Verbal complaints are sufficient grounds for investigation and citation. Marcus made another note. Understood. Please continue. Vivian pulled out a folder and began reading from what appeared to be prepared notes. On August 15th, I personally observed Mrs. Sinclair's property and noted that her vehicle had not moved from its parking space in several days. The grass appeared overgrown and mail was visible in the mailbox. On August 22nd, another observation revealed similar conditions. On September 5th, the property continued to show signs of non-occupancy. I kept my expression carefully neutral even as I noted the dates. August 15th was when my car had been in the shop for transmission repair. The grass appeared overgrown was pure fabrication. I had lawn service records to prove otherwise. And mail was visible in the mailbox was technically true but meaningless. I checked my mail every afternoon, so of course there would be mail visible during morning observations. Do you have photographs documenting these observations? Marcus asked. Vivian's jaw tightened. I do not. The citations were based on direct observation. So we have no photographic evidence, no signed complaints, just your word that you observed conditions you deemed problematic? Mr. Liu, Vivian's voice had gone cold. I've been a board member for 3 years and president for 6 months. My observations are part of the official record. Of course, Marcus said smoothly. I'm merely establishing what evidence exists. Please continue. Vivian went through several more supposed observations, each one equally vague and unsubstantiated. When she finished, she looked at me with what might have been pity if I hadn't known better. Mrs. Sinclair, the board understands that aging can be difficult. We want to help you transition to a living situation more appropriate for your current needs. We're prepared to waive the fines if you'll agree to list your property for sale within 30 days. There it was, exactly as I'd expected. The seemingly generous offer that was actually an ultimatum backed by fabricated evidence and conspiratorial pressure. I glanced at Marcus, who gave me a slight nod. Time for our response. Thank you for that offer, Mrs. Rothschild, I said, standing up. However, I'd like to present my response to the citation before we discuss any agreements. I walked to the front of the room, Marcus beside me with his briefcase. Claire smiled at me encouragingly. Patricia's expression had shifted from false sympathy to something harder to read. Mrs. Rothschild, board members, neighbors, I began. I've lived at 23 Sycamore Lane for 18 years. In that time I've paid my HOA dues promptly, maintained my property according to community standards, and been an active member of this neighborhood. The suggestion that my house is abandoned would be laughable if it weren't so serious. Marcus opened his briefcase and pulled out the first set of documents. These are my utility bills for the past 6 months. As you can see, electricity, water, gas, and internet usage are all consistent with an occupied residence. In fact, my usage patterns haven't changed significantly in years. He passed copies to each board member. Vivian's face remained impassive, but I saw Douglas Wright lean forward with interest. These are statements from my lawn care service, documenting weekly maintenance throughout the summer. These photographs, taken on the dates Mrs. Rothschild claims my yard was overgrown, show well-maintained landscaping. These are receipts from my newspaper delivery, proving that I collect my mail and newspapers daily. With each piece of evidence, Marcus methodically dismantled Vivian's claims. The audience was completely silent now, everyone leaning forward to catch every word. Now, I continued, let's address the most serious aspect of this situation. The claim that I've been absent from my home isn't just inaccurate, it's part of a deliberate campaign to force me out of my property. Patricia had gone very pale. Vivian's expression remained fixed, but her hands had stilled on her papers. Over the past several months, my sister Patricia has been telling neighbors that I suffer from dementia and am being moved to assisted living. She's shown people forged medical documents to support this claim. She's filed fraudulent power of attorney paperwork, giving her control over my finances. And she's conspired with at least one member of this board to use HOA citations as leverage to force a property sale that would financially benefit both of them. The room erupted in murmurs. Douglas Wright looked shocked. The other board members were exchanging glances of confusion and concern. Only Vivian remained still, her face now carefully blank. Those are very serious accusations, Mrs. Sinclair, Vivian said. I hope you have evidence to support them. I do, I said. Marcus, if you would. He pulled out the forged medical document that Margaret Jefferson had photographed. This is a fake diagnosis of dementia that my sister showed to neighbors. The doctor listed doesn't exist at the address provided. The medical terminology is incorrect. The formatting doesn't match legitimate medical documentation. Next came the forged power of attorney with the handwriting expert's analysis attached. This document was filed with the county using my forged signature. The notary who supposedly witnessed it has admitted to authorities that she was paid to backdate notarization of a document I never actually signed. Patricia stood up suddenly. This is ridiculous. Dorothy, you're clearly not well if you believe these conspiracy theories. Sit down, Mrs. Chan, Marcus said firmly. You'll have an opportunity to respond when Mrs. Sinclair has finished presenting her evidence. Patricia remained standing for a moment, then slowly sank back into her chair. Richard put a hand on her arm, whether in support or restraint I couldn't tell. I have recordings, I continued, of my sister discussing her plans to force the sale of my property, discussing the finder's fee she would receive from a developer, and discussing her coordination with Mrs. Rothschild to use HOA enforcement as pressure. Vivian stood abruptly. I've heard enough. This hearing is over. The board will take these matters under advisement and issue a ruling within 30 days. No, Douglas Wright said firmly. I want to hear the rest of this. Vivian, if there's even a possibility that you've been using your board position for personal gain, we need to address it right now. The other board members nodded in agreement. One woman I didn't know said quietly, I've been concerned about some of the citations issued in recent months. They've seemed targeted rather than based on actual violations. Vivian looked around the table, seeing that she'd lost control of the situation. Very well, she said tightly. Continue, Mrs. Sinclair. Marcus pulled out his laptop and set up a small speaker. With the board's permission, I'd like to play a brief excerpt from one of Mrs. Sinclair's recorded conversations with her sister. The recording was damning. Patricia's voice, clear and unmistakable, discussing the $825,000 value of my property, the developer who would build luxury homes, the finder's fee she'd been promised, and most damaging of all, her statement that Vivian understands business and knows how to facilitate valuable developments. When the recording ended, the silence was absolute. Patricia's face had gone from pale to gray. Vivian sat frozen, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. I have statements from my doctor certifying that I have no cognitive impairment whatsoever, I said quietly. I have bank records showing that someone used fraudulent power of attorney documents to access my financial information. I have witness statements from neighbors attesting to my regular presence in my home. And I have evidence that this entire citation was manufactured as part of a scheme to force me to sell my property at below market value to benefit my sister, and at least one member of this board. Douglas Wright was staring at Vivian with something like horror. How long has this been going on? There's no this, Vivian said, but her voice lacked conviction. Mrs. Sinclair is clearly experiencing some kind of paranoid episode. I have the email exchanges between you and my sister discussing my property as a redevelopment opportunity, I said. I have your phone records showing regular contact over the past 6 months. And I have a witness who will testify that you offered to withdraw the citation if I agreed to a voluntary sale to your son-in-law's development company. The other board members were now openly staring at Vivian. One of them, a woman named Sandra, said slowly, Vivian, is any of this true? Vivian looked around the table, calculating her options and finding none of them good. I may have had some preliminary discussions with Mrs. Chun about potential property opportunities. But that doesn't mean I issued improper citations. You called me 6 days ago, I said. You offered to withdraw the citation and waive all fines if I agreed to sell within 30 days. That conversation is also recorded. Marcus played that recording too. Vivian's voice offering the deal. My careful questions establishing her connection to the developer. Her admission that if the property were sold and redeveloped, the HOA's concerns would become moot. When it ended, Douglas Wright stood up. I'm calling for an immediate vote to rescind the citation against Mrs. Sinclair, and to suspend Mrs. Rothschild from her position as board president pending a full investigation. The vote was unanimous among the 4 board members not named Vivian Rothschild. Vivian sat rigid in her chair as her position, her authority, and her scheme all collapsed around her. Patricia had started crying at some point, quiet tears running down her carefully made-up face. Richard had moved away from her slightly, as if already distancing himself from the fallout. Mrs. Sinclair, Douglas Wright said formally, on behalf of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA board, I apologize for the improper citation issued against your property. The citation is rescinded, all fines are waived, and we will be conducting a comprehensive review of all citations issued during Mrs. Rothschild's tenure as president. Thank you, I said quietly. As people began standing, preparing to leave, Patricia suddenly crossed the room toward me. Dorothy, please, we need to talk about this privately. I'm your sister. You stopped being my sister when you forged my signature on legal documents, I said. When you told the neighborhood I had dementia. When you tried to steal my home. I have a daughter who loves me and stands by me. I don't need a sister who sees me as nothing more than a source of profit. Patricia opened her mouth to respond, but Claire stepped between us. I think you should leave now, Aunt Patricia. You've done enough damage. Detective Webb was waiting outside the community center when we emerged. He'd been listening from the back of the room, and he approached Patricia and Richard with professional courtesy and handcuffs. Patricia Chun, you're under arrest for forgery, fraud, and attempted exploitation of a vulnerable adult. You have the right to remain silent. As Patricia was led away, still crying, still insisting it had all been a misunderstanding, I felt Claire's arm around my shoulders. Mom, are you okay? I am, I said, and realized it was true. I was more than okay. I was free. 3 months later, I sat in my garden on a cool December morning, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The roses had finished blooming for the season, but the structure of the garden remained beautiful even in its winter dormancy. Patricia had been charged with multiple counts of fraud and forgery. She'd pleaded guilty in exchange for probation and a substantial fine, though the criminal record would follow her forever. Richard had filed for divorce, apparently deciding that his social standing was more important than marital loyalty. Vivian Rothschild had resigned from the HOA board in disgrace. The board's investigation had uncovered 2 other properties where she'd used her position to pressure owners into sales that benefited her family's development business. She was facing civil suits from multiple homeowners and criminal investigation for corruption and abuse of office. The forged power of attorney had been officially voided. My bank had implemented new verification procedures for power of attorney claims, and I'd established a trust with Claire as successor trustee, ensuring that if I ever did need help managing my affairs, it would be someone I could trust. But more than the legal victories, something else had shifted. The neighborhood rallied around me in the weeks after the hearing. Margaret Jefferson organized a welcoming committee to make sure I never felt isolated or vulnerable again. Dr. Patel stopped by regularly, just to check in as a neighbor rather than a doctor. Even people I'd only known casually went out of their way to include me in activities and conversations. I'd started volunteering at the senior center, teaching mathematics to older adults who wanted to sharpen their minds or learn new skills. I joined a book club and a gardening society. I'd reconnected with old teaching colleagues and made plans for the future that extended far beyond simply defending my right to stay in my home. Claire visited every Sunday for dinner, just as she always had. But now Thomas came too, and they'd started bringing their golden retriever puppy, who loved playing in my backyard. We'd begun talking about holidays and traditions, about the life we would continue building together in this house that was mine and would someday be hers. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Claire. "Big news, Mom. Can we come over tonight instead of Sunday? Important to tell you in person. The baby." I'd been wondering when they would start trying. I smiled and texted back my enthusiastic agreement, already mentally planning what I would make for dinner. As I sat there in the morning quiet, I thought about how close I'd come to losing all of this. My home, my independence, my dignity. If I'd been just a little less observant, a little more trusting, a little more willing to believe that my sister had my best interests at heart, Patricia's plan might have worked. But I taught mathematics for 33 years. I knew how to recognize when the numbers didn't add up. I knew how to question assumptions and prove conclusions. And I knew that the most elegant solutions were often the simplest ones. Staying true to yourself and refusing to accept someone else's false narrative about your life. The sunrise finished painting the sky and settled into the bright clarity of morning. I finished my coffee and went inside to start my day, walking through rooms that were mine, living a life that was mine, making choices that were mine. Dorothy Sinclair, 61 years old, retired mathematics teacher, homeowner, mother and soon-to-be grandmother, survivor of family betrayal and institutional corruption, and still standing, still strong, still exactly where I belonged. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.